They told me she was gone. They told me she stole 100 grand and ran off to live a life of luxury. I spent 6 months hating her, 6 months wishing I could put a bullet between her eyes for the betrayal. But tonight the devil played a joke on me. I didn't find her in a palace. I didn't find her in a hotel. I found the only woman I ever gave a damn about, curled inside a black plastic bag behind a dumpster in Chicago's South Side. She wasn't living like a queen. She was dying like a rat. And when I saw whose ring was branded into her skin, I knew the city was going to burn. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through the streets of Chicago like a serrated knife. But inside the customized armored Cadillac Escalade, the temperature was a perfect 70 degrees. Dante Cavallaro adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal suit. He stared out the tinted window, watching the slushy gray snow fly past. He was 32 years old, the capo of the Chicago outfit, and currently he was in a mood that made his own bodyguards sweat. "Rocco," Dante said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the quiet cabin. "Tell me again why the meeting with the union reps was moved to a warehouse in the meat-packing district instead of the Drake Hotel." Rocco, a mountain of a man with a scarred lip, glanced in the rearview mirror. "They said it was about discretion, boss. Federal heat is high this week." "Discretion?" Dante scoffed. "It smells like a setup. If Silas Vane thinks he can lure me into a kill box just by changing the venue, he's dumber than his father was." The car slowed to a halt in a narrow alleyway behind a row of derelict industrial buildings. The meeting had been a waste of time. No ambush, just incompetence. The union rep hadn't shown up. Dante was seething. He hated wasted time almost as much as he hated betrayal. "Boss, there's a truck blocking the exit," Rocco said, hand instantly going to the Glock holstered beneath his jacket. "Looks broken down." "Move it, or ram it," Dante snapped. He checked his Rolex, 2:00 a.m. Rocco and the second guard, a wiry man named Benny, stepped out into the biting cold to inspect the obstruction. Dante stayed inside, scrolling through his phone. He paused on a photo in his encrypted gallery. It was a candid shot taken from a security camera 6 months ago. A girl with honey blonde hair tied back in a messy bun, scrubbing a marble floor. Sophie Miller, his former head maid. The girl who had looked at him not with fear, but with a defiant curiosity that had driven him mad. The girl who had vanished the same night, $100,000, went missing from his safe along with a set of sensitive ledgers. He deleted the photo for the 100th time, knowing he'd restore it from the cloud later. He always did. Thump. A sound came from outside, barely audible over the idling engine. Not the truck. It came from the pile of garbage bags stacked against the brick wall to the right of the car. Dante's eyes narrowed. He lowered the window an inch. The smell of rotting food and old grease assaulted his nose. "Rocco!" Dante called out. "Check the trash!" "It's probably just raccoons, boss, or a junkie," Rocco shouted back over the wind. "I said check it!" Dante opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit him, stinging his face. His patent leather shoes crunched on the dirty ice. He didn't know why, but the hair on the back of his neck was standing up. It was that instinct, the predator sensing prey, or perhaps sensing a trap. Rocco kicked one of the black, heavy-duty bags. "Hey, get lost." The bag moved. A low, pathetic whimper leaked out. It wasn't an animal. It was human. Disgust curled Dante's lip. He hated the filth of the city. He turned to get back in the car. "Get them out of the way, Rocco. I don't want to run over a body on the way out. Rocco reached down and grabbed the plastic, ripping it open to drag the squatter aside. The plastic tore easily. A pale hand fell out, limp and blue with cold. Then a shoulder, then a face. Dante froze. The world seemed to stop spinning. The wind went silent. The woman was curled in a fetal position, wearing nothing but a torn, thin, oversized t-shirt that was soaked in blood and grime. Her legs were covered in bruises, turning purple and yellow. Her hair, once that vibrant honey blonde, was matted with mud and something dark and sticky. But he knew the curve of that jaw. He knew the shape of those eyes, even though one was swollen shut. Sophie! The name tore out of his throat, sounding foreign. Rocco froze, looking from the body to his boss. Boss, you know this junkie? Dante didn't answer. He moved faster than he had in years. He dropped to his knees in the slush, ruining the $3,000 suit, and ripped the rest of the plastic away. The smell was atrocious infection, old blood and garbage. Sophie shivered violently, her eyes rolling back in her head. She was barely conscious. Her lips were cracked and blue. Sophie! Dante growled, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch her, because she looked like she might shatter. She blinked one eye, focusing hazily on him. A look of sheer, unadulterated terror washed over her face. She scrambled backward, pushing herself deeper into the trash, whimpering. No, please, I didn't tell them, please don't burn me again. Dante's heart hammered against his ribs like a sledgehammer. Burn her. He reached out and grabbed her wrist to pull her from the filth. She screamed a raw, broken sound that echoed off the brick walls. As he held her wrist, the sleeve of her t-shirt slid up. Dante stared. There, branded into the soft skin of her inner forearm, was a burn mark. It was fresh, infected, and angry red. It wasn't just a random burn. It was a shape, a serpent eating its own tail. The Ouroboros, the symbol of the Vane family. Silas Vane, his rival. Dante looked at the woman he had spent 6 months hating for stealing from him. She wasn't living in luxury. She had been a prisoner. A rage so pure, so white-hot, exploded in Dante's chest that he almost blacked out. He looked up at Rocco, his eyes dark voids of violence. Who? Dante's voice broke, then dropped to a demonic whisper. Who the fuck put you here? Sophie's head lulled back. Dante. She whispered the name, a ghost on her lips, before her body went limp in his arms. Dante scooped her up. She weighed nothing. She was skin and bones. He ignored the filth transferring to his clothes. He ignored the stunned looks of his men. Open the car, Dante roared. Now! Boss, the hospital is 20 minutes away, Benny started. Call Dr. Evans. Tell him to meet us at the penthouse. If he's not there in 10 minutes, I'll kill him myself. Dante slid into the back seat, cradling Sophie against his chest. Drive. And Rocco, yeah, boss. Find out who was supposed to be at this meeting. Find out everyone who knew we were coming here. Nobody leaves Chicago tonight. Nobody. The penthouse at the top of the Cavallaro Tower overlooked the entire city. Usually it was a fortress of solitude, cold, modern, and pristine. Tonight it was a trauma center. Dante paced the hallway outside the master bedroom, his blood-soaked shirt discarded on the floor, leaving him in a white undershirt and suit trousers. He washed the grime off his hands, but he couldn't wash the feeling of her cold skin off his fingertips. Inside the room, Dr. Evans and 2 nurses he had on private retainer were working. For the last hour, Dante had listened to the silence. It was worse than screaming. Finally, the door opened. Dr. Evans, a grey-haired man who had patched up more gunshot wounds than the Cook County Trauma Unit, stepped out. He looked pale. "Dante," Evans said, taking off his glasses. "Is she alive?" Dante demanded, stepping into the doctor's space. "She's stable, barely. She's severely malnourished, dehydrated and hypothermic. She has 3 broken ribs, a hairline fracture in her left cheekbone, and extensive soft tissue damage." Dante's jaw tightened until his teeth creaked. The brand on her arm. 3rd-degree burn. Infected. We've started her on heavy antibiotics, but Dante... Evans hesitated. "There's something else. The toxicology report isn't back yet, but based on her pupil dilation and the tremors, she's been drugged, heavily, for a long time. Something to keep her compliant but lucid enough to feel pain." Dante punched the wall next to Evans's head. The drywall cracked. "Silas, she needs rest," Evans said, unflinching. He knew Dante well enough to know the violence wasn't aimed at him. "She woke up for a moment when we were setting the IV. She was frantic. She kept asking about the ledger. She said she hid it." Dante froze. The ledger. The reason he had hated her. The reason he thought she had betrayed him. "Let me see her. Dante, she's traumatized. Seeing you might... Get out of my way." Dante pushed past the doctor and entered the room. It smelled of antiseptic and lavender, the scent of the clean sheets trying to mask the lingering odor of the alley. Sophie looked tiny in the massive king-sized bed. She was hooked up to monitors, her arm bandaged, her face swollen. Dante pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. He watched the rise and fall of her chest. 6 months ago, she had been the vibrant, sharp-tongued maid who wasn't afraid to tell him his tie didn't match his suit. She was the only person in his life who didn't bow to him. He had wanted her then. He had planned to break his own rule about not touching the staff. Then the money vanished. The ledger vanished. And she vanished. He reached out, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open. The panic was immediate. She tried to sit up, gasping, tearing at the IV line. "Sophie, stop!" Dante barked, grabbing her shoulders to pin her down. "It's me! It's Dante!" She froze, staring up at him. Her eyes were wide, glassy with sedatives. Tears pooled in the corners. "Dante," she rasped. Her voice sounded like she had been screaming for days. Are you going to kill me now?" The question hit him harder than a bullet. "No," he said softly, his thumbs stroking her collarbone. "I'm not going to kill you." "You said you would," she whispered, a tear sliding down her temple. "If I ever stole from you. You said, I thought you ran Sophie. I thought you took the money." "I didn't," she sobbed, her body shaking. "He took me." That night, in the garage, he said if I didn't give him the codes, he'd kill you. I didn't give them to him, Dante. I swear. I swallowed the key. I took the ledger and I hid it in the... She coughed, choking on her own panic. He kept me in the dark. For so long. Dante felt the sick twist of guilt in his gut. While he was cursing her name, drinking scotch and hiring hitmen to find her so he could punish her, she was being tortured to protect him. "Who?" "Sophie," Dante demanded gently. "Was it Silas Vane?" She shook her head weakly. "Silas. Silas was there. He did the brand. But he wasn't the one who let them in. He wasn't the one who gave them the security schedule." Dante went still. Who was it? Sophie squeezed her eyes shut, trembling. It was the man with the silver ring. The one who calls you brother. Dante stopped breathing. The man with the silver ring. There was only one person who wore a ring like that, and he called Dante brother because they had grown up in the same orphanage before the outfit took them in. Matteo, his underboss, his best friend, the man currently running the casino operations downtown. Matteo. Dante whispered the name, tasting like ash. He wanted your seat, Dante, Sophie whispered. He told Silas that if they broke me, they could blackmail you. But when I wouldn't talk, when I got sick, they threw me away. She grabbed Dante's hand with surprising strength. You have to run. Matteo, he knows you found me by now. The truck in the alley, it wasn't broken, it was a signal. Boom! A massive explosion shook the building. The glass of the balcony doors rattled violently. The alarms in the penthouse began to scream. Dante was on his feet instantly. He looked at the monitors. The elevator shafts had been breached. Stay here, Dante ordered, pulling a heavily customized 1911 pistol from the nightstand drawer. Dante! Sophie screamed, trying to reach for him. He turned back, his face a mask of cold, calculated violence. I'm not running, Sophie. Not this time. He walked to the door, racked the slide of the gun, and spoke into his comms. Rocco, kill order is in effect. Matteo is a traitor. Shoot everyone who isn't family. Burn it all down if you have to. He looked back at Sophie one last time. I'm going to bring you his head. The memory hit Dante like a physical blow, sharper than the ringing in his ears from the explosion. It was a rainy Tuesday in November. The library of the Cavallaro estate was a sanctuary of mahogany and leather, usually silent. But that day, Dante had stormed in, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the window panes. He had just come from a sit-down with the Russian Bratva. It had gone south. His knuckles were split and bleeding, staining the pristine cuffs of his white shirt. You're dripping blood on the Persian rug. That's going to be a nightmare to get out. Dante had spun around, gun half drawn, before realizing it was just the maid. Sophie. She was standing on a rolling ladder, dusting the top shelves of the history section. She didn't look terrified, which was the appropriate reaction when the Dawn of Chicago stormed into a room bleeding. She looked annoyed. Get out, Sophie, Dante had growled, walking to the wet bar to pour himself a scotch. Not until I finish this section. The housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, will have my head if there's dust, she replied, not moving. Dante downed the amber liquid in one burning gulp. He looked up at her. Most of the staff wouldn't dare make eye contact with him. Sophie was different. She was working off a debt. Her father had been a gambler who borrowed too much from Dante's loan sharks. When the father died, the debt fell to her. Instead of selling her to a brothel, which was standard protocol for the lower-level captains, Dante had intervened. He gave her a job. Come down here, Dante ordered. Sophie sighed, placed her duster on the shelf and climbed down. She walked over to him, her simple grey uniform, unable to hide the grace of her movements. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief. Without asking for permission, she took his injured hand. You should really stop punching people, Mr. Cavallaro. It's bad for your skin, she said, dabbing at the split knuckles. Dante stared at her. Her hands were rough from work, but her touch was gentle. She smelled like vanilla and floor wax. It was intoxicatingly domestic in a life filled with gunpowder and cheap perfume. They insulted the family. Dante said, his voice dropping an octave. He didn't pull his hand away. And I'm sure they regret it now, Sophie murmured, wrapping the cloth around his hand. She looked up, and for a moment the air in the room grew heavy. Charged. Dante found himself leaning in. He wanted to know if she tasted as sweet as she smelled. He wanted to forget the politics, the murders, the constant threat of prison, and just lose himself in something soft. "Sophie," he whispered, "you know you don't belong here." "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered back, her breath hitching as his free hand moved to rest on her waist. "I could send you away," he said, his thumb grazing her jawline. "Paris, Rome. I could clear the debt." "I don't want charity," she said fiercely, her blue eyes flashing. "I pay what I owe." "You've paid enough." He lowered his head. Their lips were millimeters apart. He could feel her trembling, not from fear, but from the same magnetic pull he felt. It was dangerous. A Don didn't fall for the help. It was a weakness, a liability. The heavy oak door creaked open. They sprang apart. Matteo stood in the doorway, a silver ring glinting on his finger as he rested his hand on the frame. He was smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Interrupting something, brother?" Matteo asked, his gaze lingering on Sophie with a look that made Dante's skin crawl. "Nothing," Dante said, his voice cold again. Sophie was just leaving. Sophie hurried out, head down, face flushed. Dante watched her go, feeling a strange sense of loss. That was the beginning. For the next few weeks it was stolen glances. Late-night conversations in the kitchen when he couldn't sleep. He learned she loved classical music, but had to sell her cello. He learned she wanted to be an accountant, that she was brilliant with numbers. Then came the night of the theft. Dante had been out of town. He returned to chaos. The safe in his private study was open. $100,000 in cash was gone. The black ledger containing the names of every judge and politician on his payroll was gone. And Sophie was gone. Matteo had presented the evidence. Security footage of a figure in a maid's uniform entering the study. A one-way ticket to Mexico, purchased in her name. Dante had felt a betrayal so deep it eclipsed all logic. He hadn't just lost money. He had lost the only person he had started to trust. He had shut down his heart that night. Now, standing in his penthouse, listening to the alarms scream, Dante realized the truth. The figure in the video had been a plant. The ticket was a decoy. Sophie hadn't run. She had walked into the study and found Matteo stealing the ledger. She had confronted him. And because she refused to be bought, Matteo had handed her over to Silas Vane to be tortured, knowing Silas would enjoy breaking Dante's favorite toy. Dante gripped his gun tighter. The flashback faded, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the present. He wasn't going to make the mistake of letting her go again. The explosion had taken out the main power. The penthouse was plunged into darkness, lit only by the red strobe of the emergency lights and the glow of the city below. "Contact, West Terrace." Rocco's voice roared over the comms. Glass shattered as grappling hooks pushed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Men in tactical black gear swung into the living room, assault rifles raised. "Get down!" Dante yelled, tackling a nurse who was frozen in the hallway. Bullets chewed up the drywall where his head had been a second ago. Dante rolled, coming up on one knee. He fired the customized 1911 3 times. Bang, bang, bang. 2 mercenaries dropped. The third scrambled for cover behind a marble pillar. Dante didn't wait. He moved toward the bedroom. "Rocco, status." "Elevators are rigged with C4. We can't use them." Rocco shouted, the sound of automatic gunfire erupting in the background. "They're coming up the stairwell, too. It's a pincer movement, boss. We're boxed in." Dante kicked open the bedroom door. The room was in chaos. The blast had knocked over equipment. Dr. Evans was on the floor, shielding his head. But Sophie was trying to get out of bed. She had ripped the IVs from her arm, blood trickling down her skin. She was pale, shaking, violently, clutching the side table for support. "Sophie!" Dante holstered his weapon and rushed to her. "What the hell are you doing? They're here for me!" She gasped, her eyes wild. "Matteo, he knows I'm here. If I stay, they kill you." "If you leave, you die," Dante snapped. He grabbed a thick wool coat from his closet and wrapped it around her shivering frame. She was so frail he could feel her ribs through the fabric. "Can you walk?" I think so." She took a step, and her knees buckled. Dante caught her before she hit the floor. "Okay. Change of plans," Dante muttered. He scooped her up into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She buried her face in his neck, the smell of gunpowder and expensive cologne overwhelming her senses. "Dr. Evans," Dante barked. "Grab the medical bag. You're coming with us." "Where?" the doctor stammered. "The panic room is compromised if they have explosives," Dante said, his mind working tactically. "We're going to the vault." "The vault," Sophie whispered. "My private garage, sub-basement." Dante kicked the bedroom door open and stepped into the hallway. The air was thick with smoke. "Rocco, fall back to the library. Activate the bookcase protocol." Rocco and Benny appeared from the smoke-firing suppression rounds down the main corridor to keep the mercenaries at bay. "Go, boss! We'll cover you!" Benny yelled. A grenade rolled across the floor, stopping 10 feet from them. "Move!" Dante roared, shielding Sophie's body with his own as he dove into the library. Boom! The concussion wave blew the library doors off their hinges. Debris rained down on them. Sophie screamed a sharp, terrified sound that cut through Dante. "I've got you," Dante whispered into her ear, dusting plaster off her hair. "I've got you." He moved to the massive bookshelf on the far wall. He pulled a specific leather-bound book, The Count of Monte Cristo. The mechanism clicked. The heavy shelf swung open, revealing a steel elevator shaft. It was a service lift from the 1920s, kept off the digital schematics. "Get in," Dante ordered Evans. He carried Sophie inside. Rocco and Benny stumbled in after them, Benny clutching a bleeding shoulder. Dante slammed the gate shut and hit the button for the sub-basement. The lift jerked and began to descend slowly, too slowly. Above them, they could hear the mercenaries breaching the library. Shouts, gunfire. "They'll cut the cables," Rocco wheezed, reloading his Glock. "No," Dante said, his eyes adjusting to the dim light of the shaft. "This lift runs on a separate hydraulic system, but they will be waiting at the bottom." Sophie looked up at him. The adrenaline was fading and the pain was returning. "Dante, why did you come for me? In the alley?" Dante looked down at her. His face was smeared with soot. His shirt ruined his empire, literally burning above his head. "Because," he said, his voice rough. "The money didn't matter. The ledger didn't matter. I realized that the moment I saw you in that trash." He touched her cheek with a bloodied finger. "I'm going to burn the world for what they did to you, Sophie. But first, we have to survive." The elevator shuddered to a halt. The sub-basement. The vault. This wasn't just a garage. It was a bunker. Rows of luxury cars, sat under fluorescent lights, but along the walls were racks of weapons. "Benny, get the medical kit from the SUV. Patch yourself up," Dante ordered. "Rocco, get the armored G-Wagon ready. We need heavy plating." Dante carried Sophie to the passenger seat of a matte black Mercedes G63 AMG. He buckled her in. "Where are we going?" she asked weakly. "Safe house, north of the city. No one knows about it except me." Suddenly, the lights in the garage flickered and died. Pitch black. A voice echoed over the PA system of the garage. A voice, smooth, mocking, and familiar. "Dante. Dante, Dante. Always hiding in the basement. Did you really think I wouldn't disable the secondary power?" "Matteo," Sophie whimpered. "I see you found our little runaway maid." Matteo's voice sneered. She wasn't supposed to survive the winter. Sloppy work by Silas. But no matter. You can't drive out, brother. I've welded the exit doors shut, and I've pumped gas into the ventilation system. Dante sniffed. The air was changing. A sweet chemical smell. Not cooking gas, nerve agent, or something combustible. "He's going to suffocate us," Rocco said, panic edging into his voice. Dante looked at the sealed blast doors at the end of the ramp. Then he looked at the wall of weapons. Then he looked at the G-Wagon. "Rocco," Dante said calmly, "grab the RPG from the wall." "Boss, he welded the doors." Dante climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The V8 roared to life, echoing in the concrete tomb. "Then we make our own door." He looked at Sophie. "Cover your ears and open your mouth. It's going to get loud." "Dante, you can't." "Rocco, blow the wall." Rocco shouldered the rocket-propelled grenade launcher. He aimed not at the doors, but at the weaker cinder block wall adjacent to the street. Whoosh! Crack! Boom! Dust and debris exploded inward. A hole the size of a truck appeared, revealing the snowy street outside. "Hold on!" Dante yelled. He slammed the accelerator. The G-Wagon surged forward, tires screeching. They flew over the debris, smashing through the remaining rebar, and landed hard on the asphalt of the alleyway. Gunfire immediately erupted from the rooftops. Bullets pinged harmlessly off the armored glass. Dante spun the wheel, drifting the massive car out of the alley and onto the main road. He floored it, weaving through traffic, leaving the burning tower behind. He glanced at Sophie. She was unconscious again, her head lolling against the seatbelt. "Rocco called the boys in New York," Dante said, his eyes fixed on the road, cold and deadly. "Tell them Chicago has fallen. Tell them I'm calling in every favor. Matteo wants a war. I'm going to give him a massacre." The safe house was a fortress disguised as a log cabin, buried deep in the snowy woodlands of northern Wisconsin, 3 hours from Chicago. It was off the grid, no internet satellite phone, only generator power. For 3 days, Dante didn't sleep. He sat in the armchair beside the fireplace, in the master bedroom, watching Sophie. She was fighting a fever that Dr. Evans said could kill her. The infection from the brand on her arm had spread to her blood. "Her body is exhausted, Dante," Evans had said, changing the IV bag. "She's fighting, but she has no reserves left." Dante looked at the woman in the bed. She looked like a porcelain doll that someone had smashed and glued back together wrong. Her face was slowly healing, the bruising turning from purple to a sickly yellow. But she was so thin. On the 4th night, the fever broke. Dante was dozing in the chair, his hand resting on the duvet near her foot. He woke to the sound of weeping. Sophie was awake, curled into a tight ball, staring at the fire. She wasn't screaming this time. She was crying silently, tears soaking the pillow. "Sophie." Dante moved instantly, sitting on the edge of the bed. She flinched, pulling the blankets up to her chin. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice raspy. "I didn't mean to wake you. I had a dream about the basement." Dante's jaw tightened. "You aren't in the basement. You're with me." "I look disgusting," she said, squeezing her eyes shut. "I saw myself in the mirror when I went to the bathroom. The scars, the burns. I look like a monster." Dante reached out and gently pulled the blanket down from her face. She tried to resist, but he was persistent. "Look at me," he commanded softly. She opened her eyes, filled with shame. "You don't look like a monster," Dante said, his voice thick with emotion. "You look like the only thing that matters." He took a warm washcloth from the basin on the nightstand. "Let me clean the dressing." "No, it smells. It's ugly." "Sophie." He gently unwrapped the bandages on her arm. The brand, the Ouroboros, was angry and red, a permanent mark of Silas Vane's cruelty. Dante stared at it, his hatred for Silas and Matteo boiling in his veins, but his hands remained steady and gentle. He cleaned the wound with saline, applying fresh ointment. Sophie hissed in pain, but didn't pull away. "Why didn't you give them the codes?" Dante asked quietly, taping the fresh gauze. "Why didn't you just give them what they wanted? I would have forgiven you. I would have understood." Sophie looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Because it wasn't just money, Dante. The ledger, it has the names of the judges, the police chief. If Matteo got that he wouldn't just take your money, he would have sent you to prison for life, or he would have had you executed." She reached out her thin fingers, brushing the stubble on his cheek. "I couldn't let them kill you, even if you hated me." Dante closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. The guilt was a heavy stone in his chest. He had spent 6 months cursing her name while she was enduring hell to save his life. "I never hated you," Dante admitted, his voice cracking. "I hated that I couldn't stop thinking about you." He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. "I promise you, Sophie, I am going to erase them. I'm going to make sure that every time they close their eyes, they see my face. And then I'm going to end them." Sophie pulled back slightly. "Dante, wait. There's something you need to know. We can talk about business later." "No," she insisted, sitting up with effort. When I was in the cell, Silas liked to brag. He thought I was broken. He thought I was too drugged to understand." Dante listened intently. "Silas handles the money for Matteo now," she said. "He complained about the transfer schedule. He said all the liquid cash from the takeover, everything they stole from you, plus the casino profits, is being moved tonight." Dante's eyes narrowed. "Moved where?" "To the port. They're shipping it out in containers to an offshore account in the Caymans via a shell company. Tonight is the transfer. If they move that money, Matteo wins. He'll have the resources to buy the commission in New York." Dante stood up, the predator reawakening. "The port of Chicago. Do you know which terminal?" "Terminal 4, Sophie said. "The Vane family owns it." Dante checked his watch. It was 10:30 p.m. He walked to the door. "Rest, Sophie. Dr. Evans is outside." "Where are you going?" she asked, fear returning to her eyes. Dante paused in the doorway, the firelight casting long shadows across his face. He looked like a fallen angel, beautiful and terrifying. "I'm going to get my money back." The port of Chicago was a graveyard of steel containers and freezing mist. The wind off the lake was brutal, whipping through the rows of rusty metal boxes. Terminal 4 was lit up like a football stadium. Floodlights cut through the dark. Dozens of armed men patrolled the perimeter. In the center, a massive crane was loading a black shipping container onto a freighter docked at the pier. Matteo wasn't taking chances. He had his entire crew here. Dante lay prone on top of a stack of containers, 300 yards away, looking through the scope of a suppressed sniper rifle. The wind bit at his exposed skin, but he didn't feel it. "Rocco," Dante whispered into his comms. "Status." "Charges are set on the east gate," Rocco's voice crackled. "Benny and the New York boys are in position at the west." Dante had called in his favor. A specialized hit squad from the Gambino family in New York had flown in via private jet an hour ago. They were professionals, silent, lethal. "Wait for my signal," Dante said. He scanned the area. He saw Silas Vane, the man who had tortured Sophie. Silas was standing near the loading ramp, wearing a thick fur coat, smoking a cigar, and laughing with one of the dock workers. He looked comfortable, arrogant. Dante shifted his aim. The crosshairs settled on Silas's knee. "This is for the brand," Dante whispered. "Thwip." The suppressed shot was barely a whisper. Down on the dock, Silas's leg exploded. He collapsed, screaming, clutching his shattered knee. Chaos erupted. "Now!" Dante roared into the comms. Boom! The east gate exploded in a ball of fire. Rocco drove a stolen fuel tanker through the wreckage, blocking the exit. "Go, go, 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 go!" The New York squad breached the west fence, moving in a tactical wedge formation, their HK-416 rifles cutting down Matteo's confused guards with surgical precision. Dante didn't stay on the roof. He dropped the rifle and rappelled down the side of the container, pulling out dual combat knives. He wasn't here to snipe. He was here to hunt. He moved through the maze of containers like a ghost. A guard rounded the corner. Dante was on him before the man could raise his weapon, a knife severing his carotid artery. The guard dropped silently. Dante picked up the guard's submachine gun and kept moving. He was heading for the loading ramp. He was heading for Silas. The firefight was intense. Bullets sparked off the metal containers. The sound was deafening. But Dante had tunnel vision. He reached the center of the clearing. Silas was dragging himself behind a concrete barrier, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. His men were trying to cover him, but they were pinned down by Rocco's suppressive fire. Dante stepped out into the open. 2 guards saw him and turned to fire. Dante didn't break stride. He fired 2 bursts. Both guards fell. He walked up to the concrete barrier. Silas looked up. His face pale and sweaty eyes wide with shock. Dante?" Silas stammered, blood bubbling from his lips. I thought you were dead." Dante loomed over him, casting a long shadow. He kicked the gun out of Silas's hand. "You thought wrong," Dante said coldly. "It wasn't me," Silas shrieked, holding his hands up. "It was Matteo. He made me do it. He said—" Dante shot him in the other knee. Silas screamed a high-pitched sound that was swallowed by the wind. "That was for the broken ribs," Dante said, his voice devoid of mercy. He crouched down, grabbing Silas by the lapels of his expensive coat and dragging him close. "Where is he?" Dante hissed. "Where is Matteo? He's on the boat," Silas gasped, sobbing. "He's on the freighter. He's leaving with the money. Please." Please let me go." Dante looked at the massive ship. The engines were rumbling. The gangplank was already being raised. Matteo was cutting his losses. He was running. Dante looked back at Silas. "You like fire, don't you, Silas? You like branding people." Dante pulled a flare gun from his tactical vest. He cracked it open and loaded a flare. "No, no, no, no," Silas whimpered. "Sophie sends her regards." Dante fired the flare point blank into Silas's chest. The magnesium ignited instantly, burning through the coat and flesh with blinding white heat. Dante turned and ran toward the ship, leaving the screaming man behind to burn in the snow. He sprinted across the dock. The gangplank was 10 feet in the air. The ship was drifting away from the pier. Dante didn't hesitate. He leaped. His fingers caught the edge of the metal railing. Ideally, he would have pulled himself up effortlessly. But he was tired, and the metal was icy. He slipped. One hand lost its grip. He dangled by one arm over the freezing black water of Lake Michigan, the massive propeller churning below him. "Boss!" Rocco screamed from the dock, too far away to help. Dante gritted his teeth, his muscles screaming. He thought of Sophie in that bed. He thought of the fear in her eyes. He roared, swinging his legs and hooking a heel over the rail. With a burst of hysterical strength, he hauled himself up and over the railing, collapsing onto the metal deck of the ship. He was on board, and somewhere on this ship, hiding like a rat in a maze, was his brother. The deck of the freighter. The Iron Lady was a slick sheet of ice. The wind howled off Lake Michigan, masking the sound of Dante's footsteps as he moved toward the bridge. His suit was frozen stiff, clinging to his body like armor. His hands were numb, but his grip on the combat knife was iron tight. He bypassed the lower decks. He knew Matteo. His brother wouldn't be hiding in the engine room with the rats. He would be on the bridge, looking down at the world, pretending he was a king. Dante kicked open the hatch to the bridge tower. 2 crew members drew weapons. Dante moved with the efficiency of a machine. A slash to the wrist, a pommel strike to the temple. They were down before they hit the floor. He climbed the stairs, the metal ringing under his boots. He reached the top, the wheelhouse. The door was unlocked. Dante pushed it open. The room was bathed in the red glow of the instrument panels. Beyond the glass, the black void of the lake stretched endlessly. Matteo stood by the helm, staring out at the darkness. He held a glass of scotch in one hand and a heavy revolver in the other. He didn't turn around. "You're late, brother," Matteo said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "The wind was bad," Dante replied, stepping into the room. He didn't raise his knife. He just watched. Matteo turned slowly. He looked impeccable in a navy trench coat, his hair slicked back. But his eyes, those familiar brown eyes that Dante had trusted since they were 5 years old, were dead. "I watched you jump," Matteo said, taking a sip of scotch. "I told the captain to speed up, but deep down I knew you'd make it. You always make it. That's your curse, Dante. You survive everything." "Why?" Dante asked. One word. It was the only one that mattered. Matteo laughed a bitter, jagged sound. "Why?" "Because for 20 years I've been your shadow. Dante is the Don. Matteo is the underboss. Dante is the brains. Matteo is the fist. I built this empire with you brick by bloody brick. But who gets the respect? Who gets the fear? You." He raised the revolver, aiming it at Dante's chest. "And then, you brought her in," Matteo spat. "A maid, a piece of trash with a debt. You looked at her with more respect in 1 week than you looked at me in a decade. I realized then, you were weak, and the weak don't deserve the throne. She protected me, Dante said, stepping closer. She took your torture and she didn't break. She has more honor in her little finger than you have in your entire body. Honor is for dead men, Matteo roared. Bang! The bullet slammed into Dante's shoulder. The force spun him around. He crashed into the radar console. Pain, hot and blinding, seared through his left side. Stay down, Matteo screamed, walking forward, the gun shaking in his hand. Don't you make me do it again. Stay down and die like a man. Dante groaned, pressing his hand to the wound. Blood leaked between his fingers. He looked up, his vision swimming. You missed my heart, Matt, Dante wheezed. You always were a lousy shot. Shut up. Matteo cocked the hammer again. He was 5 feet away. I'm going to take the money. I'm going to disappear, and you're going to be fish food. He pulled the trigger. Click. Matteo froze. He stared at the gun. A misfire. In that split second of hesitation, Dante lunged. He ignored the screaming pain in his shoulder. He tackled Matteo, driving him back against the thick glass of the windshield. The revolver skittered across the floor. They grappled. It wasn't a martial arts fight. It was a brawl between brothers who hated each other. Fists flew crunching against bone. Matteo was strong, fueled by jealousy. But Dante was fueled by something darker. Matteo kneed Dante in the gut and shoved him back. He pulled a switchblade from his coat. I loved you, you son of a bitch! Matteo screamed, slashing. The blade cut a line across Dante's cheek. Dante caught Matteo's wrist. He twisted hard. There was a sickening snap. Matteo howled, dropping the knife. Dante didn't stop. He slammed a right hook into Matteo's jaw, then a left. He grabbed Matteo by the lapels of his coat and head-butted him. Matteo crumbled, sliding down the console to the floor. He was beaten, bloody, broken. Dante stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping from his face and shoulder. He picked up Matteo's fallen silver ring from the floor. It had slipped off during the fight. You didn't just betray me. Dante whispered, his voice trembling with rage. You hurt her. You put her in the trash. Matteo looked up, one eye swollen shut. He coughed blood. Do it, Dante. Send me to hell. I'll save you a seat. Dante looked at the ring. Then he looked at the open door leading to the icy deck. No, Dante said coldly. Hell is too good for you. He grabbed Matteo by the collar and dragged him out onto the freezing deck. The wind was ferocious now, the waves crashing against the hull. Dante dragged him to the railing. Dante, wait, Matteo pleaded, realizing what was happening. Dante, we're brothers. The orphanage. Remember the orphanage? My brother died the day you touched her, Dante said. He lifted Matteo up. Dante, no! Dante shoved him over the edge. Matteo's scream was swallowed instantly by the roaring darkness of the lake. There was a splash, and then nothing. Just the churning black water and the biting cold. Dante stood at the railing for a long time, watching the wake of the ship. He clutched his bleeding shoulder. The radio on his belt crackled. Boss, it was Rocco. We secured the dock. The ship is stopping. The Coast Guard is paid off. We're coming to get you. Dante brought the radio to his lips. It's done, Rocco. And Matteo. Dante looked at the empty spot on the deck. He missed the boat. The winter had melted away, leaving Chicago wet and grey, but alive. The Cavallaro penthouse had been rebuilt. The walls were reinforced steel now, the glass bulletproof. It was no longer just a home. It was a fortress. Dante stood on the balcony, adjusting his cuffs. His shoulder still ached when it rained a permanent reminder, but the wound had healed. The door behind him slid open. Sophie stepped out. She looked different. The hollow cheeks were filled out. Her skin was glowing. She wore a tailored black dress that screamed power, her honey blonde hair cascading over her shoulders. The scars on her arm were still there, but she didn't hide them anymore. She wore them like war paint. "The commission is waiting," she said, her voice steady and confident. "The Dons from New York and Vegas are in the boardroom." Dante turned to look at her. He didn't see the maid anymore. He didn't see the victim in the alley. He saw the only person in the world who knew the cost of loyalty. "Let them wait," Dante said. He walked over to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She melted into him naturally, resting her hands on his chest. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "About a room full of old men who want to kill me?" "No," Dante smirked. "I'm nervous about what you're going to do with the budget sheets later. You're ruthless with the expenses, Sophie." She laughed, a light, genuine sound that chased away the shadows of the last few months. "Someone has to keep you honest, Mr. Cavallaro." Dante's expression softened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sophie stopped breathing. He opened it. It wasn't a diamond. It was a simple, elegant band made of platinum inlaid with a small emerald. "I don't do kneeling," Dante said softly, "and I don't do romance. But I need you to know something. This city is mine. The money, the power, the soldiers. It's all mine. But I am yours." He took her hand, the one with the faint scar from the IV line, and slid the ring onto her finger. "Will you stand by me, Sophie, through the blood and the fire?" Sophie looked at the ring, then up at his dark, dangerous eyes. She didn't hesitate. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him a kiss that tasted of promise and peril. "Until the city burns down, Dante," she whispered against his lips. "And even then I'll be holding the matches." Dante smiled a real smile. He took her hand, and together they turned and walked back inside to rule their kingdom. And that is the end of Dante and Sophie's story. From a freezing alleyway in the South Side to the top of the criminal underworld. It's a brutal reminder that sometimes loyalty isn't found in bloodlines, it's found in the people who bleed for you. Dante spent months searching for a traitor only to realize the traitor was his own brother, and the hero was the girl he almost threw away. Now I have a question for you guys. If you were Dante, could you have forgiven Matteo? Or is betrayal from family the one thing that can never be forgiven? Let me know your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of a story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss the next saga. I have a story coming up next week about a billionaire bodyguard and a secret heiress that you definitely don't want to miss. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next chapter.